On the de-risking side, Renata, I'm going to come to you. As a mission-driven investment institution, how do you assess the bankability of nature-based projects that deliver public goods, such as coastal protection and biodiversity conservation that we heard Dr. Ahmed speak about? And this is a two-part question. And the second part, what kinds of blended finance structures are most effective for scaling these solutions? Is there a role for insurance?
Thank you very much. And first of all, thank you for the invitation to be here. Before I answer the question, I'll try to explain a bit what the organization is that I work for, which will help explain why I'm answering the question this way. BWB is a nonprofit that was set up about 10 years ago by people in investment banking. And the idea was to use the skills that we have learned in investment banking and implement them in high impact projects. Because we see that a lot of the times there's a translation issue between the public and the private sector. And as we've already heard today, and I think this is, one of the biggest issues, is there's just not enough public money to get to where we want to be with the climate. So we will need to increase the private sector involvement. So with that in mind, that's also kind of how we look at bankability. So our main lens is from our work in the private sector. And of course, one of the big things there is to get the risk and reward in balance. And that would make a project bankable. That does not mean there's a specific return that is asked, but it needs to be in balance with the risk that the investor is taking. One of the ways that we start when we look at nature-based solutions projects is through revenue streams. We try to see, are there any revenue streams here, or are there creative ways where we could create revenue streams for these projects? A lot of the projects that I personally work on are in Europe, but a lot of my colleagues work in Africa and Asia as well, and now setting up in South America. But one thing that we see everywhere is that for nature-based solutions, there's not a lot of traditional financial return. So we like to think about things like biodiversity credits or ecotourism that we can put into the project to try to get some financial returns. For example, there's a project in Spain called La Maleza. It's a wildlife reserve, a nature park that they have tried to, well, they loaned 13,000 euros from a blended fund. It's called Rewilding Europe Capital. It has institutional and philanthropic investors. So they also have institutional investors that request a return on the loan. And what they did is they started a safari with a 4x4 that give tourists a tour of the park. And they have these very special animals called tauros. They're sort of cows, which people love to see. And these animals are reintroduced into this wildlife preserve because of their ecological necessity. And now that is how they pay back their loan. And this is one example of how you can get some revenue streams to projects that maybe don't necessarily have them naturally. Another thing that we try to look at is if there is no revenue stream, are there costs that are being saved by doing this? And I think this is a big topic for the insurance sector as well, and how insurance comes in, prevented cost. That can be a great benefit, of course, as well. And how can we price that today to make sure that the benefit is seen from avoided cost? Mangroves are a very good example of flood damage that can be avoided by investing in this. And how can we make private investors who also benefit from this see their value upfront? The third one has also kind of been mentioned, which is impact measurement. It's very important to think of other co-benefits, for example, that come from these projects, other things that people and as well the private sector as well benefits from. And the more we can measure this, the better we can put a value on this, and the better we can convince the private sector that it's worth investing in this. Because, for example, better health for people, better air quality, also leads to less sick people, less cost to the medical sector, etc. So we are I think this is something where we should work together a lot with the academic sector as well to see what we can do in predicting these and measuring these co-benefits. And then for the second part of the question, looking at blended finance, this is one of the things that we do every day because we are trying to get more private sector involved, and the best way to make this happen is through blended structures. Because as I was saying, the risk and return need to be balanced, and one great way to make sure that the risk is lowered if you cannot increase the return is by de-risking, and this is an amazing spot for the public sector or philanthropic sector to come in and really try to make sure that it's still a feasible and bankable project. Of course, there are different ways to do this. The insurance has also already been mentioned, but other ways are also first loss guarantees. If you have some kind of securitization structures, first loss tranches to be absorbed by the public sector, or technical facilities assistance, setting up and providing the, let's say, pilot case to prove that this is a bankable project and that being carried by the public sector. One example that we have is the Agri-3 Fund, which is a fund that is backed by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, public sector, and philanthropic capital, conservation philanthropy. And what they do is they de-risk loans in the agricultural sector. One that I know that they did was a $20 million loan to a family farm in Brazil, where this family farm needed the loan for soil restoration. And they got the loan from Rabobank, which is a commercial lender. But they would not have gotten the loan without, at the return that they could afford, without the Agri-3 Fund giving a first loss guarantee to the bank. And together, the private sector could lend money at a decent rate to this business. So I think these are, all different ways to get it done, and some examples. Thank you. It's a bit boring, but I fully agree with both Miguel and Dr. Ahmed on what they have said. I think, the most important thing is, of course, to work together, but I think the private sector should be incentivized and should be pushed to be incentivized to do much more than they are doing. Right now, the main incentive for the private sector on decision-making is financial returns, and I think with just that, we're not going to get the involvement that we need. So policy and regulation really needs to step up to push them in the right direction. For example, the hotels on the coast, I think that they should have the responsibility to invest in where they are profiting from. And this is something that policy and regulation will need to push, because unfortunately, they're not going to all do that from their own motivation. I do think that I'm not a policy expert at all, so I will leave that to the experts, but I do think that there are changes to be made there to make sure that we get to the volume and the scale that we want to get with the private sector.